This podcast is sponsored by valleygivesback.org. What will you be remembered for? Name a Valley nonprofit in your estate plan and create a legacy that tells future generations what mattered to you. Making a gift that costs nothing during your lifetime is easy and revocable if things change. With a planned gift, you have the power to impact the Valley forever without affecting your current lifestyle. Your action inspires others to make a difference in their own way. Remember the Valley. Ask your accountant, financial planner, or attorney about planned giving options. Plan now. Give later. Impact tomorrow. Learn more at valleygivesback.org.
For hundreds of years we've brought you the news. Printed the info, we gave you the clues. Owners' profits were always sky high. Changing market now threatens our lives.
Hey everybody, welcome to Navel Gazing, the Valley Indy's podcast. My name is Eugene Driscoll. I'm a reporter with ValleyIndy.org. That's an online nonprofit newspaper covering Ansonia, Derby, Seymour, and when we can, Shelton. If you want to look up past episodes of Navel Gazing, go to ValleyIndy.org. Check out Navel Gazing under our masthead. Can't miss it. Noise in the background is my rescue puppy. She sleeps a lot. I'm recording this Friday, September 28th, and she's decided to just get up a little and move around. Go back to sleep, Sophie. So, guest today, Jim Gildea. I actually haven't done the interview yet. I'm planning to do it tonight at 7 p.m. over the computer, so the audio will be uneven, just to let you know in advance. Jim Gildea is from Derby. He is the chairman of the Derby School Board. He is the chairman of the Ansonia-Derby School Regionalization Committee. That's a mouthful. We're going to be talking about that, some school board issues or education issues within the city of Derby. And Jim is also the chairman of the Connecticut Commuter Rail Council. That is a group that advocates for improved rail service in the state of Connecticut, and that includes the Waterbury branch here in the lower Naugatuck Valley. We've had Jim on the podcast a few times before, so I'm looking forward to that conversation. Hopefully it went well. Hopefully by the time this publishes, it'll be a good talk. But before I get to the interview, I wanted to record this intro. By the way, this podcast is sponsored by valleygivesback.org. But I wanted to take a moment to remember Melvin Mason. Melvin Mason was a friend and a colleague, fellow local journalist who passed away September 26th. He was just 43 years old. He leaves behind his wife of 2 years, Allison, his stepdaughter, Laura, and it's just incredibly sad. And Melvin was just a good guy. And in a lot of ways, he had just started this new chapter in his life after a rough spot. You know, he was the editor of the Stratford Star. I don't know if I said that. But before that, being the editor-in-chief over in Stratford, he had worked for the Connecticut Post for many years. He was their Valley reporter. So there might be a lot of people that remember Melvin, who maybe worked in city government or were involved in local happenings going back about, 10 years ago. I know he covered Ansonia. It was actually before the Valley Indy launched. But I met Melvin through my wife, Autumn, who was then a photographer at the Connecticut Post. And Melvin could talk to anybody. He, first time I met him, I think it was on Elizabeth Street. I was in my car, and we were just, I think my wife introduced us, and then she drove off. I think she had just completed an assignment. I don't really remember, but Melvin me and him talked for probably just an hour there on the street. First time meeting him, just sort of commiserating about local news coverage. I think at the time I was still at the News Times at Danbury, so he was giving me the lowdown of the Valley. And he also lived in Derby. You know, he lived in the Sterling Towers for a bunch of years there. And just the least cynical guy I've ever met. just a positive personality, a guy with an ability to persevere, to always look at the bright side of things. I know that sounds cliched, but that was Melvin. Like, he was a guy who looked at the bright side of life. I didn't know him as well as a lot of people. I'm sort of inspired by reading his Facebook page where people who knew Melvin since they were kids are posting their memories of him. There's one guy, he was from Brooklyn. Melvin was a proud product, Brooklyn, New York, the old school New York, not the Brooklyn we know now, not hipster Brooklyn, but, we're talking 70s and 80s Brooklyn. And like this guy shared, he used to walk home from the bus stop with Melvin every day, and there was a kid who had a disability who was a massive kung fu fan. They always used to show the kung fu movies. I'm from New York too, but not the city. I'm an hour north. But was it NYW, I think it is, Channel 5, every Saturday would have kung fu marathons, and apparently this kid with a disability was a huge fan, and they would do karate fights, him and Melvin always made it a point to let him win, in third grade. And I didn't know Melvin at that time, but the Melvin I knew, yeah, that makes total sense. So he was a guy, he was just a gentle spirit, a gentle giant, a guy that was raised well, obviously, a gentleman, a kind person. That was Melvin Mason. He had great respect for the Valley. Like I said, least cynical guy I've ever met. And I'd even try to get him to badmouth people, if we were hanging out, and we would do that on occasion when he was freelancing for the Valley Indy in about 2010, 2011. I would try to get, what's with some of these towns, Melvin? What's with so-and-so supervisor or that guy on the board of selectmen? And Melvin always looked at, like I said, he always looked at the positive side, just not one to be negative. Even when, when I knew him, he was unemployed. He was a victim of downsizing, like so many in my industry. But Melvin just, he just kept at it. And it was so nice to see him. I hadn't talked to him in a long time. We used to hang out quite often. But he fell in love. He fell in love. He got married 2 years ago. And on his Facebook page was just, he embraced being a dad immediately. And, I just knew in the time that I knew Melvin, it's something that he wanted. The guy, not to be a cliche, but he had a lot of love to give, He definitely did. And he was just very old school, very old fashioned, and almost uncomfortably so. Like, I'm not used to somebody who's so sort of that outgoing, but just instantly likable, And I guess I have a son, Jack, and Jack's shy, right? Or actually just learned his shyness goes beyond, we're dealing with some delays of some kind. That there's issues my son has that have recently been discovered that we're dealing with. But anyway, I say that because my son doesn't really take to people. He doesn't like to even say hi or look you in the eye. He's just kind of keeps to himself a lot of times, and it hurts him because he knows he's this way, and he's only 7, and he feels like there's nothing he can do about it. But he met Melvin when my son Jack was probably 2 years old. I live in Derby, and I invited Melvin over, a bachelor at the time, and I think I had 2 other bachelor buddies over. And it was like my first time alone for an extended time with my son, who was 2 years old, and a couple of my bachelor buddies. I had like a little get together, and we did this ridiculous game, this Dr. Seuss type game that required a lot of physical activity outside. It was basically grown men, approaching 40, doing hula hoops and stuff like that. And Melvin committed, man. It might have been the first time he met my son. And he was just like running across my backyard, sliding like a maniac, much to the delight of my son. He was truly a gentle giant and just a good guy. And it's just so sad that he's gone. I mean, he worked with Kate Ramuni, right? She covered the Valley for years. They worked out of the Connecticut Post office when they had one over the bureau on Elizabeth Street in Derby. Kate Ramuni remarked on Facebook, I once said in the office I hadn't had a home-cooked meal in so long. And the next day, Melvin brought her in a home-cooked meal. That was Melvin Mason. You know, I hate to say it again and again, but just a good guy. And I never thought, you know, we'd lose him this early. So, and then in just terms of a local reporter, you know, guy put in incredible hours, you know, for not a lot of pay and not a lot of appreciation. You know, in this era when it's hyper partisan and everybody wants to take a swing at the press and everybody seems to be infected with this rage virus of partisanship. Melvin took a lot of that personally because I would see it on his Facebook page. And I'm like that too, where you're just trying to do a good job. You're basically every day, you don't want to make a mistake and you try to be as fair and you try to be human to people. That's what Melvin was. And I'm sure he just wanted to, when he went to bed every night, just to know that he didn't wrong anybody that day. That was very important to Melvin. I know because I had conversations with him about that. And I actually had Melvin on our, it wasn't on our podcast. We do The Great Give every year as a fundraiser. It's a 36-hour online fundraiser for like 1,000 charities in New Haven and the Greater Valley. And 2 years ago, we had a bunch of Valley reporters on, including Melvin, to just talk about what it was like covering the Valley during their tour here, if you will. So here's just a quick clip of Melvin in the Valley Indy office in Ansonia. This was a few days before he was to be married.
Now
let me interrupt for a second.
Sure, go ahead.
You have a big life change coming. When you're getting married?
Yeah.
When?
Friday in New York City. Yep. Yeah, my wonderful fiance Allison. She and I will be wedded on Friday, and yeah.
Does it feel strange? Yeah, because I'm married too, and at first it's like in your it's like,
yeah,
what is going on?
I know, and I was going to ask you, like, you know, how did you deal with it? But I'll just tell you right now, it's just
go rewind. The Dewdrop In was here earlier. He's got all how I deal with everything.
Oh, okay.
Jake Carlucci from the Dew.
Yeah, no, but I'm kind of I've been obviously. Bachelor for God knows how long, and then all of a sudden
you know exactly how long.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, well, obviously, yeah. So it's a change because it's almost like with me, and even my future wife will tell you this. It's like I'm very resistant to do changing on certain things, but then when I get into it, I'm like, okay, this isn't that bad, and I think she kind of pulled me along in that way, and I haven't really had a chance to get used to the whole, getting ready to get married thing because I've been so busy working. It was only yesterday when I was talking on the phone because she's in New York right now, getting set up.
And her name's Allison?
Allison Gardner, soon to be Allison Mason, which I know she's like, yay about. Yeah,
we should probably. What's her now? Let's check that.
Yeah, sure. I got my phone right here. Yeah, she's very excited about it, and I think I finally started getting really excited about it when I talked to her yesterday. And my brother, she actually met my brother recently, my brother and my sister recently, and and it was great to see them on a personal note on a much happier occasion.
That was Melvin Mason, recorded 2 years ago during The Great Give. So I respected him as a reporter because he had a big heart, and if it's any condolence or any comfort to his family, his new young family, you can see how much he was loved by reading his Facebook page. So rest in peace, Melvin Mason. You'll be missed. I'm sorry I didn't reach out and talk to you more in the last few years. I regret that. I wish I had done more than just the occasional comment under a Facebook post. You were a good guy, and we'll miss you. So, thank you. Okay, so the second part of this podcast now is my interview with Jim Gildea, the Derby School Board Chair. In this interview, we talk about the Ansonia-Derby School Regionalization Committee. He gives an update. They've been working since May. They have an important meeting coming up October 22nd. The public is welcome at all their meetings. Then we talk about there are now retired police officers acting as security in Derby schools, with more on the way. We talk about an advanced manufacturing program briefly that Jim is very committed to at Derby High School. And then we talk about some improvements coming to the rail lines that run through the valley. So here's my interview with Jim. Joining me on the line, as promised, is Jim Gildea, the chairman of the Derby Board of Education, the chairman of the Ansonia-Derby School Regionalization Committee, the chairman of the Connecticut Commuter Rail Council. He does everything. Jim, thank you so much for joining us.
Completely my pleasure, Gene. Always happy to be here.
So let's talk for a second about the School Regionalization Committee. Maybe there are people listening who come across this podcast that don't know exactly what that committee is or what's happening. I've also seen some things on social media in various places on Facebook where people are think it's a done deal and the schools are going to close any day now. So what's the purpose of this group? Can you tell us about it a little bit?
Yes. So this is a joint committee of the towns of Ansonia and Derby that was put in place by our legislative bodies to study and investigate the potential opportunities associated with regionalization. It's per Connecticut State General Statute 10-39, which again speaks directly to a temporary regional school study committee.
And how many people are on the committee? I know we're rehashing basic stuff here, but how many people are on it, and how often do you meet? And are the meetings open to the public? And give us that kind of detail.
Sir. So there are 10 members, 5 members from each town. The way that it works out is that there's I think it's worked out this way, but there's 2 Board of Education members from Derby. There's 2 Board of Education members from Ansonia. I know that there is a 2 Board of Aldermen members from Ansonia, 1 Board of Aldermen member from Derby, 2 educators from Derby, and then an educator from Ansonia as well, who is the superintendent of the Norwalk school system.
And how long or how many meetings have you had at this point? When did this start, and how far along are you in the process?
I would say that we've had about 5 meetings. We started in May. The first meeting was, like more of an organizational meeting. So I would say the last 2 or 3 meetings, we really kind of got into some meat and potato topics and starting to move the ball forward and start to make progress. And for us, at the stage that we're in, progress for us is trying to come to agreement, come to consensus on a consultant who will really help us define that plan, articulate the plan, and ensure that the plan meets the requirements of the state statute that I mentioned. We also spent a fair amount of time working on an RFQ to solicit such a consultant, so we did a lot of work around that. And I think it'd be a great time to say that the Naugatuck Valley Council of Governments certainly has been an amazing resource during this process. What's
their involvement in this?
So they're actually significantly involved. They are actually the organization where they're the grantee. So we received a $168,000 grant for this work, and the grant flows through them. So in theory, they got the grant, they administer the grant, so they really, in many ways, the contract for the grant is between them and the Office of Policy and Management, the OPM. So they're actually significantly involved and certainly a major player.
And in terms of this plan that you've mentioned, so you're hiring a consultant of some type to come up with a plan. So will this be a person or entity that'll basically act as a coach and a guide, sort of a Sherpa that takes you through whatever you have to study? Because I'm thinking, like, how does one even study an issue like this? What's the role of the consultant, and when do you think you'll choose one?
So there are certainly a lot of steps behind this, and there's a lot of areas that have to be investigated, from enrollment studies to real estate holdings between both towns, to contributions, to budgets, to makeup, to to buildings. So certainly that's going to require expertise. That's going to require people in the arena who are familiar with that, who've done work around that. So when we submitted our request for proposal, for request for qualification, we actually received 4 responses. So it was really heartening to see that there is a number of different organizations out there, who have experience around this. And when we did interview the consultants, it was really, they all really did a great job. So certainly there's a lot of expertise out there in this arena. There's been other towns that have either looked into merging, have discussed merging. There's other towns that even inter-district have looked how they could reshuffle their schools to take for account a changing enrollment. So I think the point is there certainly is expertise in this area, quite frankly more so than I thought.
And when do you think you'll hire this consultant? And what's I know you can't say like exactly how much you're going to pay, because I assume that's all still under discussion. But what type of price range are we talking here for this consultant?
Well, I would say this is that the grant talks very specifically, and it breaks out the amount of money that is available for each bucket. So there's certainly different tasks associated with the project, and what I would say is that the whole $168,000 clearly is not designed for the consultant. There's referendum fees in there. There's administrative fees in there. There's public participation fees in there. So what I would say is that we had 4 consultants. They were all competitive. We're not in a position to negotiate till we select a consultant, and I'm cautious. I'm fairly optimistic that our next meeting on 10/22 we'll be able to select a consultant.
So October 22nd. Do you know where that meeting will be?
That meeting is going to be at Ansonia High School at 7:00 p.m.
7 p.m. October 22nd. You'll hopefully choose a consultant. And then this plan, I mean, what does this person or this group come up with? Are we talking like 1,000-page document that they give you, weighing the pros and cons? Or do they give you here's what it could look like if you want to go this route, and then yay and nay on that? Like, what's the process at that point?
So the closest I could say is that we were able to look at the Northford and Colebrook regionalization plan, okay, which is a very, I think they underwent a very similar process to us. There were 2 towns that had declining enrollments, although I think they were even smaller than Ansonia-Derby as far as enrollment is concerned. And so they undertook this step. So I've seen the report, and it does. It talks specifically about which buildings would house which students, what the 5-year budget was. It talked about things like that, what kind of operating budget you would need. It talked about the makeup of the Board of Education, what each town, how each town would be represented and what a Board of Education would look like. So it really does kind of walk you through what a regionalized school system would look like, so that when the voters, because ultimately this has to get voted on by the electorate of both towns, so the voters get a sense of what the school system is going to look like, where their children are going to go to school, how they're going to be represented on the Board of Education, what the initial cost may be. I mean, each town has different real estate holdings, and there's a cost to enter into regionalization. So, it put that out there. So it was a very detailed plan letting the voters know what they can anticipate if, in fact, the towns were merged.
And then this plan that they come up with, let's say, do you have a timeline as to how long it'll take to create to get a plan in your hands, or the committee's hands?
So the state statute does talk about having this completed within a 2-year period. And what I would say is I feel pretty comfortable thinking that all those who responded to the RFQ felt confident that it would be able to meet that time frame.
And then does the committee at that point, I mean, you could reject the plan, I suppose, if they come up with a plan and there's talk. It doesn't necessarily have to go to referendum. How does that work? Does it have to go to your respective boards of older men and women and then go to referendum?
So I believe there's a committee vote, then there's a board, like to your point, a legislative body vote, sending out to referendum, and then ultimately, and rightfully so, the voters have the final say.
And I know I haven't personally attended any of these meetings yet. We had Ethan Fry, the other reporter here at the Valley Indy, I think go to the first 2 or 3.
Yeah, absolutely. He's been there a few times.
Yeah, and there was it was sort of free talk at the beginning. There seemed to be some concern at the very beginning that maybe some on the committee had already made up their minds about which way this is going to go. Where does all that stand? Do you get the sense that people are going into this with an open mind? Is there anything you want to say to the public who might be concerned that this is already a quote-unquote done deal?
Yeah, I think you're right. I mean, I think Ethan did capture some very, articulate discussions about, being open-minded, because at that point, and truth be told, there's people outside the committee, who weren't privy to the discussions from the committee. We're talking about things like savings associated with regionalization. It was kind of quite silly, to hear that type of talk, on the news, hearing people talk about savings when we hadn't talked about it. We hadn't spent 1 second discussing it. And so for anyone to talk about any potential savings is certainly premature. So we did have some honest dialogue about, whether or not, people were open-minded, because truthfully, I think it's certainly okay to be supportive of the concept of regionalization. But at this point, and at the point we're in, we haven't done any work, so we don't know what it's going to look like. We don't know, what the costs associated, with each town is going to be, when you factor in real estate holdings. We don't know what a Board of Education composition is going to look like. We don't know if you're going to lose the neighborhood school concept. So there's so many unknowns that it's far too early to be touting, regionalization, either, in my opinion, either pro or con, until we do the work.
It's almost like after October 22nd, you might be at the end of the beginning, maybe. It just only really launches then once you get this consultant on board, it sounds like.
Yeah, I think, Gene, that's an excellent point. I think that's really where it will take off, and that's really when you'll start to see some progress. And it may not be a lot of progress, visible right out there in the open, but again, having a consultant on board, an expert on board, starting to really delve into those the deep issues, is important.
Hey, this is Eugene, most likely interrupting myself to bring you a word from our sponsor, valleygivesback.org. What will you be remembered for? Name a Valley nonprofit in your estate plan and create a legacy that tells future generations what matter to you. Making a gift that costs nothing during your lifetime is easy and revocable if things change. With a planned gift, you have the power to impact the Valley forever without affecting your current lifestyle. Your action inspires others to make a difference in their own way. Remember the Valley. Ask your accountant, financial planner, or attorney about planned giving options. Plan now. Give later. Impact tomorrow. Learn more at valleygivesback.org. And those will be things, when you say not out in the open, I assume the consultant is going to be behind the scenes having to just crunch a ton of numbers and collect reams of data to bring back to eventually put this report or plan together.
Yeah, for certain. But I would also say, though, is I don't think any of us plan to do this in a vacuum. We recognize the need for constant communication. We recognize the need for public outreach. We recognize the need to, ensure that the citizens of both towns are updated. And if they have concerns, they're voicing those concerns. Their concerns are being heard. I think it's important that, we reach out to all segments of the population, parents, students, seniors who may not have children in the school system, but will be equally impacted by things like money savings or tax benefits or the cost associated with the, initially with regionalization, or loss of, let's say, truthfully, I think you lose a little bit of perhaps representation, local representation. So these are all things that, you don't want the public to be involved with and not to hear about it at the last minute.
And then how do you bring the public into a big discussion like this? I mean, of course, the public is free to go to any meeting that you have, and I know there's comment periods where people can get up and speak, but are you planning to make an effort? I'm thinking of like the Downtown Now that was done under the previous administration in Derby, where there was that charrette where they really tried to bring the public in. Like, how do you tackle something like that? Or do you plan to do meetings all around Derby and Ansonia to get people involved and let them know what's happening? Or I don't envy you trying to get people on board there, but how does that work?
I think the committee publicly has talked about the need to engage the public, whether that be public forums, whether that be surveys. I don't think we've fleshed that out per se, but absolutely conceptually we get the need to involve all the various stakeholders, because quite frankly, if we don't do that, then this really isn't going to go anywhere.
And do you think, I mean, this is kind of me asking you to predict a little bit. I won't do that because the work's only just begun. But I've heard about efforts to do this in the past before I lived in Derby, and they were sort of shot down. And there is that sentiment that, well, this just will never happen. It's not going to, there's too much history and pride involved. Do you think there's anything that's different nowadays compared to previous attempts to try to get Derby and Ansonia to do something together education-wise?
I think that's a fair question. As you know, I was on the Board of Ed from 1992 to 2006, and I was chairman for 14 of those years.
Oh, yeah, so you're the guy to ask.
So we did, I would say that we've looked at it, as far back as there. And I remember being with, Ruth Feinberg-Connors, the superintendent of Ansonia then, and Dr. Chesler at Derby. I remember having those very discussions. So you're right, it's been a discussion for a long time. I'd say there's a few different dynamics, and the cost of education has just continued to rise astronomically, and so I do think that, that's a variable that continues to widen, and it is becoming increasingly more difficult to offer the services and the education you want to, at the same time, trying to maintain a stable tax rate. So I'm not saying that hasn't always been an issue, because clearly, that's always been the age-old battle in politics, right? Is taxes versus service. That's always been there. But what I will say, though, is the cost of the service that we're in now, and special education obligations, and state mandates, and it just seems like the cost continues to escalate, and we're starting to get an area where you wonder about having a breaking point.
Okay. Jim, is there anything else you wanted to add about the Ansonia-Derby School Regionalization Committee that I'm not asking you, before we move on?
No, I think you've really hit all the key points, and again, at this point, I'll be honest, it's been a pleasure, certainly getting to know the Ansonia folks, and working with them, and I think it's been very collaborative, and we've all gotten along very well. So it's certainly been a very rewarding experience up to now.
That's good to hear. Okay, moving on to another Derby education-related topic. I saw an agenda, I guess a week or two ago, where the school, I might get the titles wrong, the school district hired a number of security-type officers. Is that how I should refer to them? I don't want to I know there's very specific...
I think we were referring to those as school safety officers. Okay,
school safety officers. And this grew out of something that happened at the end of the last school year during the budget process in Derby, right before the tax board voted to adopt a budget, which includes, a bottom line number for the school district. There was talk of this pressing need to have an increased security presence in all the schools in Derby. And there was this idea from the superintendent. He was working with Chief Narowski, the Derby police chief, on what that would look like. And it looks like something happened. It looked like it's now, as of a week or two ago, being put into place. Can you explain to us what's going on?
And you gave certainly a great background. I would also add in the tax board was certainly extremely helpful because this is being funded out of an e-grant that we get that reimburses us for phone and data that flows through the city. So I would want to say that certainly we've always enjoyed a strong partnership with the city, and it's got, again, I would want to note that the tax board was certainly a critical player in this. So to your point, the city, the police department, and the Board of Ed, I would say, came together, and we put a plan in place to put school safety officers in each of our schools. It's sad and it's heartbreaking, but the society that we live in, there just seems to be one tragedy after another, and it was really born out of the fact that when we send our children to school and our parents send their children to school, you just want to make sure that there is a safe environment as possible. So we saw an opportunity to, we had some grant money available. The city, again, worked with us, and we were able to budget and then ultimately start appointing school safety officers to serve in each school. What I would say, though, Gene, is just right off the bat, we're initially going to hire 5, one for each school, so one at Irving School, one at Bradley School, one at the Derby High School, which also, as you know, has a Little Raider University in it, and then one at Derby Middle School. Initially, we were very satisfied with 3 of the candidates, so we've officially hired 3. One will be at Irving School initially, one will be at Bradley School, and just to roll the program out until we get our 4th, we will have one school safety officer that will be a shared resource only initially between the high school and the middle school. We reposted the position. We have a new round of applicants coming in, and then the goal would be to have that 4th school safety officer, so that way there'll be one at the high school, one at the middle school, and then we'll have a trained floater, a trained backup to cover vacations, illnesses, sicknesses. So that's where we are right about now.
Okay. And I should just, this is completely unrelated, but if people listening hear what sounds like thunder, my family just came home from swimming down at the Derby Community Center. It's their weekly swimming lesson. And so the dog and the kids are running around upstairs, because I'm actually recording this in my basement as opposed to the Valley Indy office. So I apologize if that's too noisy. But
well, Gene, if we were in the office, we would have had to contend with trains going by. So
yeah,
one or the other, right?
Yeah, as long as they were on time. There were some problems today, I saw.
Absolutely.
But these security officers or the school safety officers, are they retired cops? Are they carrying weapons? Are they with the Derby police? How does that work?
So the first 3 are yes, they're retired police officers and/or state troopers. They will be carrying, but they are licensed. They'll have rigorous training, the same annual certification that police officers do. And again, they are retired police officers who, certainly are very familiar with carrying weapons and training and certification. So, we don't anticipate that to be a seamless issue.
Yeah, I recognize one of them as a guy like from Derby originally. I think if I saw a name on an agenda, I don't know if he was hired. And I can't believe he's retired. Some of these police officers get to retire young, which is good for him.
Yeah, so. Absolutely. And yes, all 3 were appointed at our last meeting.
Okay, so John D'Antona
yes,
was one
John
of them?
D'Antona, yes.
Okay, yeah, there you go. There's a local name for people. So
Absolutely.
that's good news.
Yes, again, without, getting too much off topic, I think that this certainly, we've made a series of I think, pretty neat improvements going into the school year. That, Chief, was the most important one, providing a level of safety and security and comfort for our parents. We also have our director of curriculum starting this year, which is pretty neat. We also were able to separate out the athletic director. Our assistant principals used to be the athletic directors.
That's a lot of work. That's it.
Yeah, and so we were able to separate that out and put an athletic director in so that our administrators could focus on administrating and educating. So, I think we had certainly a neat number of improvements in the school system this year, and the school safety officers, school safety officers were certainly one of the more important ones.
And one of the improvements mentioned that I've really not touched upon or know anything about, but have heard a great deal about, and I have you for 5 more minutes. I'm not going to keep you too late on a Friday night, but
No
this advanced manufacturing program that started up. We keep hearing these. There are manufacturing jobs out there. They're advanced. You need some. It's not like the old time manufacturing jobs, but they're high paying jobs out there, and these companies have trouble filling the positions.
It's pretty neat because this touches both of my worlds, Gene, and so I get really excited about this. For those who don't know, I mean, a lot of people know the volunteer work I do, but my day job is I am the director of manufacturing at Bigelow Tea, so I'm able to speak pretty passionately about manufacturing in the Northeast, and the very point you mentioned is that there's manufacturing jobs that I could tell you that just go unfilled year after year. I just gave a talk, and I know we only have a few minutes, but I just was a keynote speaker at Material and Manufacturing Summit Institute at Southern Connecticut State University with the New Haven Manufacturers Association. It was just interesting to hear, the speakers from the New Haven Manufacturers Association all tell the same story. We can't fill our jobs. So we're really excited about the Advanced Manufacturing Center. I would say that, just to give you a really quick update of where we are now.
Yeah, like what is it though? Like where is it? And like describe that to me a little bit.
Yeah, so it is in the high school. It is in one of the vacant, one of the areas that we had in the building that due to declining enrollment, we were due to declining enrollment, we had some space available. So it is right there, located in the high school. We currently have about 10% of the equipment in place. And we expect the other 90%, I would say, in January. Right now, we offer 3 classes for our students. We're offering SolidWorks, blueprint reading, and benchmarking. When the bulk of the other equipment comes, CNC lathes, CNC milling machines, once we have the bulk of the equipment, then we'll roll out the full curriculum, which we expect to hopefully happen in about January. So
that's good.
Really excited about that.
Who's financing this? Is this a partnership between the district and another group, or how is that happening?
So this there was grant money associated with this program, and we are working closely with Housatonic Community College.
Good.
Who just again, because I'm up in Fairfield, I've had the pleasure of having some of their folks work for us at Bigelow Tea, and so I've had the opportunity to see their manufacturing center, and they're certainly doing a lot of good things up there, and they're actually a great organization to partner with for certain.
That's great. So some top-notch stuff happening. I would ask you about the latest on rail line improvements, but I don't know. I promised you a half hour, and it's been a half hour, Jim. So maybe we'll have. I
can give you a quick 30-second, real quick 30-second update.
Yeah, when are they gonna? We need more trains. Darn it, new trains, better trains. We need these Sorry, I'm sorry.
Two quick exciting things. One definitely quick exciting thing. So the Derby passing siding is just about complete. They're now going to move on to the Beacon Falls siding, which is one of the 4 sidings associated with creating the additional trains and allowing us to increase service. At the same time, the Department of Transportation has just entered into a contract with the vendor who's going to supply the new coaches and the new locomotives for the Waterbury branch line. Now that's still 3-4 years away, but they're now entering into contract there. They are actually ordering an additional set of trains to take advantage of the passing sidings. So I think that's certainly exciting news. Mm-hmm. And then lastly, and this is just really a small thing, a short-term thing, is we met with Metro North just Wednesday, Grand Central Terminal at its Gray Bar building, meeting with MTA Metro North President Catherine Rinaldi and other folks at Metro North, and they announced that the restoration work, I won't get too deep, but they're doing some work down the line, which is severely impacting the on-time percentage on the Waterbury branch. They're just about done with that work, the track restoration, and within about 2 weeks, we expect the on-time percentage, which has been terrible in the 60%, to climb back up.
Oh, that's good news.
There's my 60-second rail spiel.
Yeah, Jim, you should get a job announcing somewhere. That was awesome. Like you don't have enough to do. All right, sir. Well, Jim, as always, I want to thank you for taking the time to talk to me and for just being so open. I truly appreciate it.
Completely my pleasure, and I want to tell you, if I could, and just leave you with my last party thought, is my favorite tweet, and then I told Ethan this, that I had seen absolutely in the last probably year, was your tweet that said, you think $99 is too much for an ad? Ask the Evening Sentinel how much they're charging. I loved it, Gene. Very nice.
I got to learn how not to be bitter. That's why I like talking to you.
That was classic. That was excellent. Are you kidding me? I loved it.
All right. Hey, Jim, thanks a lot. Have a good weekend.
Take care, Gene. Bye.
For hundreds of years we brought you the news. Printed the info, we gave you the clues. Owners' profits were always sky high. Changing market now threatens our lives. Post-literation, critical reading, dumbed down nation, signs of inbreeding. TV sucking ideas from our head. Public discourse just about dead. We'll ride the dinosaur. Yeah, ride the dinosaur. Our readers are in the opens each day. Clickbait, a prurient way. There's free information here to stay. Not even hookers give it away. Advertising, metastasizing, newsroom shrinking, constant attrition. We'll ride the dinosaur. We'll ride the dinosaur. Dinosaur. Headlines, bylines, pictures too. Editorial comment for $1 or $2. Fire down the block, the murder next door. And now we wonder what it's all for. Social media coming free to you, funny pages, the mayor's wages, criminal scenes, corruption schemes, ink state wretches asking tough questions. We'll ride the dinosaur. Yeah, ride the dinosaur. The presses are running all through the night. We're printing the truth with all of our might. We're platform agnostics, got that interweb too. Buy an ad, see what we can do. We still have subscribers, still have our fans. We're here every day, so give us a chance or we'll make an art stand. Just hold us in your hand and we'll ride the dinosaur. Yeah, ride the dinosaur.